Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Nathan Cowan. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Rival IQ, and excited to join you today to talk about justifying social media within your organization. You know, in today's session, a couple of house cleaning items. The first is it is being recorded. And so we will send out a link to the recording so that you can view it at a later point, but also want to make sure that you're notified of that. The second is that we do have all of you on mute, but we have a great chat panel that's included, and we really invite you to ask questions as we go along. I have a partner in crime here who's helping me with this webinar. We'll surface some of those questions along the way, so please submit questions. I'm happy to answer them and break them out throughout. Those are the two main items. If there's anything else that you have questions on, Danica's here to help in case you're having any trouble accessing the webinar. So what are we going to cover today? Well, you know, one of the first questions that you might be asking yourself is why is a chief revenue officer talking about justifying social media? And in this case, I'm emblematic of the problem, which is not always the way I like to describe myself. But oftentimes as social marketers, you're going to be working with executive officers or people that are particularly on the side of sales that are more focused on revenue or other attributes and may not understand the value of social. And so we want to spend some time digging into how do you use data to highlight the critical importance and the impact that it can have on company strategic goals. So we'll do that with a little bit of an overview about Rival IQ. As the salesperson, I'm going to give you just about a 45-second pitch about who we are and what we do in case we're new to you. And then we're going to sort of table anything else about Rival IQ until the very end. We'll spend a fair bit of time in two areas. One is making the case for social media, right? How do you advocate for the idea that this is going to be crucial for the business? And then the second is how do you use data to actually inform that conversation? And so those will be the two areas that we focus on the most. All right, so here's my 45 seconds. You can all time me. This is a little bit about Rival IQ. Our focus is on, really providing insights and analysis around digital marketing and particularly around social. And our real objective is to help give you the tools to set a better strategy with data, to benchmark performance, and then ultimately to automate all of the reporting processes so that you can simplify the way you collect, aggregate, and report on the data. Right. We've got about 600 customers, and really it runs the gamut of vertical markets between brands, B2C, B2B, and we also work with a number of marketing agencies as our clients who are providing services to customers. And we're global, so we've been very fortunate to work with companies from the United States, United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, sort of all across the globe, and certainly appreciate all of our customers. All right. So enough of a sales pitch. I might have gotten over 45 seconds, but hopefully that's enough on who we are. Let's talk a little bit about making the case for social media. Right? So there's a bunch of words or terms that we hear from our target audience. Right? One is social media is given a fraction of the budget of other marketing efforts, but is seen by far more people. There is an incongruous aspect of how big the reach is of social marketing, and yet how much money or resources are put to it. We hear often that social media is helping the company, but I don't have a way to show it, that it becomes more emotional than it does factual. We hear that executives don't realize how much competition is investing in social media, and so oftentimes that sort of gets you into a place where you are understanding from that executive, well, why is somebody better than we are when they might be putting money behind that? Right? Nobody at my company appreciates how social media is the first place our customers look for information about us. Right? We also hear that they don't know if the impact social media is making on the overall health of the business. We definitely hear from a lot that I'm overwhelmed and cannot convince anyone to approve budget to help me. One of the biggest single factors we find with our customers is how often they either have an individual person supported by an intern supporting a pretty significant social media audience. And that's simply not enough and can be overwhelming. right? We hear that social media is treated as an afterthought, that the audience is growing, but you can't really explain why. This is intended to just encapsulate the myriad challenges facing a social marketer in both justifying and really providing use case information around why you're being successful. So, how do you build a business case? Well, one of the first things that we find is really crucial and has helped me understand where our social media efforts are really being impactful to the growth of our business is when my partners on the social side are aligning their efforts with existing department or company goals. I'll give you a really good example of that. You might, as a company, have a goal of increasing your NPS score. That might be one of your 3 strategic initiatives for the year. Well, if you start to understand about how social can help build loyalty, customer retention, customer communication, and can tie back how that's helping drive the goal of improving NPS standings, that can be a real benefit to getting a validation of how your social strategy is working. It may be, as it often is for organizations, we want to grow top-line revenue. Well, you can start to tie back, right, using things like UTM codes and tracking how much of your web traffic is being driven from social, and then through your funnel, ultimately to close deals. But that connectivity to the actual goals of the company will help people understand how social is an important leg of the stools and contributing to the success of those goals. Okay. So the second is really demonstrate that social media drives revenue. Look, I know that the pendulum in marketing has gone from the sort of emotional and theoretic that it was maybe 20, 30 years ago around advertising into every single dollar that we spend in marketing, we want to be able to tie it back to or attribute it back to revenue coming in the door. So as a social marketer, it's not easy, but you have to find a way to do it, right? It is the #1 way you can increase the investment for social media, right? You have to be able to tie back either that we're retaining customers and growing revenue from them, we're adding customers, or finding a way to grow the business in some meaningful fashion if you want to be able to get broader support for your social efforts internally. Okay. The third, all right, really explain the power of social media to promote your brand. For social marketers, this seems like second nature. Most social marketers have grown up in the early nascent stages of social media and have understood it as a core part of their everyday life. But many of the executives that you're working with may not have that same experience. And so going back to the very basic level of understanding that social media is the central place that potential and existing customers will engage with the brand. Most people are probably like me in the respect that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I do, literally before I get out of bed, is I open up my iPad, I check my email, and then I immediately go to social. And I'm in this netherworld between I'm still at home in my private life, but I'm getting ready for work. And if I'm absolutely connected in that way and a brand comes out and I'm looking at their content, I'm more likely to be in a state of mind to think about how that might influence my day or my purchase decisions. Our sort of personal and professional lives are blended together in social, and so in many ways they become the modern day billboard for really creating that air cover that your brand needs to be more successful. But helping an executive or helping other business partners within your organization really understand that is really, really crucial to being successful and justifying that. Okay, so I think those are some areas where we've seen people be really successful in terms of making the case to invest in social, right? Another big thing is be out in front of the objections that you may get to your argument, right? So they're coming, right? So one, it doesn't contribute to revenue. It's inexpensive. It's a B2C concept. Those are all things that I anticipate hearing. One of my favorites is, an intern can do that, right? Those things we know to be untrue, but we still are going to be faced with getting those objections from our partners. So we've got to come with a rational argument for why it should be a top priority, and then really address it directly with facts and data, right? I think bringing data to an emotional fight is often the quickest way to win in our minds. Okay? So again, to recap this side of it, right? The first thing, make sure you are aligning your social media efforts with the existing company goals, right? Make sure that you've got a clear and logical path that connects your social efforts to driving revenue within the organization, right? Third, explain the power of social media to promote your brand. I use the term air cover often, but it's that constant awareness that you're creating within your audience so that you're in front of them the moment that they might want to make a purchase decision or begin to evaluate a solution that you can provide, right? And the last is make sure that you anticipate objections to your argument and be prepared to address them with data. Right? These 4 steps are going to really help you build a strong business case to get some focus and attention, and more importantly, alignment to your social media strategies. All right, so let's assume we built a business case, right? The internal audience says, great, let's go ahead and let's make more of an investment, right? Let's go and do some things that are going to help grow some of the ideas that you've brought to the table. Well, the next step is, right, how do I use data? Where do I get it? And then how do I deploy it internally to make sure that I continue to get support and I can continue to be successful? So let's first talk about the social metrics that matter. You know, in my mind, there are 4 things that really matter in when I'm looking at social metrics, right? The first is awareness. Right? Are we generating awareness? Are we reaching a percentage of the audience that we're targeting? And more importantly, are we growing that audience month over month? That particular metric is crucial because you intuitively get more awareness the larger your audience is. The second is reach. Right? Again, how much of that audience, as it continues to grow, are you actually connecting with? The third is impressions, right? So where are you making impressions with them, and how is that causing the audience to interact with you? And that leads us to the fourth, which is engagement, which is ultimately the key metric in social that demonstrates success. Is, are you creating content that your audience is engaging with? Because an engaged audience is more likely to be loyal and more likely to spend money with you. Right? Those things are really important to sort of getting a baseline of those social metrics and communicating internally, like, these are the metrics that matter, and getting everybody aligned to that and then being able to consistently report on it. Okay. So let's also talk about traffic and conversion. So beyond social, we want to tie what we're doing in social into how is that driving people into our website and our web assets, right? So we want to be able to understand, using something like Google Analytics, are we seeing traffic come from specific content, from specific channels, from specific times of days, right? How many people are visiting the website, right? Are they coming to blogs or landing pages? How often do they come to pricing pages, and do they abandon the session once they get to pricing? That kind of information will help you understand both how you're interacting with that audience and then the steps that they take when they come to your web assets, and where you can improve your website to be able to maximize the investment you're making on the social side so that they move from just visiting the website to taking more additional action, right? Ultimately, understanding traffic and conversions is crucial to understanding what are they doing when they get to your site, so that you can continue to iterate on that and better connect your social strategy to what their experience might be on the site. Now, one of the things that we believe is certainly crucial is the concept of competitive or comparative benchmarking. So what is comparative benchmarking? In our mind, it is, I've got to look at my competitors and or companies that are targeting the same audience to get a baseline understanding of what they're doing and how they're performing. A really good example in terms of getting buy-in with data is, you might say to somebody internally, hey, I've grown our social audience by 2%. and they don't have any context to is 2% good. Well, if you do a benchmark looking at your competitors and month over month they're growing their social audience by 5%, that 2% number has context. It doesn't feel as positive. Conversely, you might see situations where your engagement rate is 0.5%, and that might feel like a really poor number because 0.5% isn't very much. But when you look at competitors and they're doing, significantly less than that, right? They're doing 0.25% or 0.1%, then all of a sudden, when you're doing 3 times better than they are, that becomes really impactful. It gives context and meaning to the numbers that you're bringing. So having that comparison is really valuable. Right? It also does a couple of things, right? It helps you understand, are there areas that they may be putting money behind? Are there strategies that they're leveraging on specific channels that you haven't thought of that you might be able to employ within your strategy to go and be successful with that same audience? You can't be successful if you don't have a baseline competitive analysis of what those companies are doing and how you compare to them. And as you continue to go on, that comparison really allows you to justify the strategies and measure the strategies that you're taking and report on them, and more importantly, allow you to execute better in the way that you do it. Okay? So, right, results, outcomes, benefits, right? These are the things that matters, right? Ultimately, you're thinking of how did social marketing support, influence, or drive the marketing efforts, right? So again, if we go back to this idea of one of the company goals is to increase top of the funnel. Great. Well, then how is social contributing to that? How many people came from content that was deployed on a social site? How many are looking at training videos on YouTube? You've tried out Facebook Live and had those interactions. What has that done in terms of driving traffic to the web assets? And then are those web assets turning into marketing qualified leads, as an example? Being able to tie what you've attempted to do, what the results were, what the outcomes of that are, and ultimately how that's benefiting the business is the story that you want to be able to tell internally, right? So there's a couple of things that I'll close with in this area, right? We've gone quickly through the idea of understanding how to justify the case, right, for social metrics that matter, and really how to be able to use data. A couple of points that I want to leave you with, right? First is you're passionate about social. Right? You believe in its power. You recognize how pervasive it is for most business users today, but your audience may not. And understanding that they are at a different place with the impact social can have is really important. So take the time to educate them on how social works. Help them understand how it contributes to the overall strategy of the company, how it will improve the awareness and the performance of the business, and then ultimately making sure that you follow that up with really concrete data. The data piece is the really big key. Being able to communicate what your metrics are, starting with that benchmark and then showing the growth from that, is the most surefire way to get additional resources. If you can tell a story that says, well, under our current budget, we've grown our audience 5% every single month, and we're seeing these interactions on driving, leads into the top of the funnel that ultimately turn into this revenue. We believe that if we doubled the marketing investment, or if we increased it by 20%, that we would have a commensurate increase in the key areas that we're measuring. That's bringing data to a really important conversation point that makes the decision much easier. And I think advocating for that so that you're not always in a position where people are not valuing the overall contribution that you have or may not be investing in it will help change that dynamic. So a lot of data, a lot of points, and I hope what you come out of this with is the key idea around communicating internally and then measuring and constantly reporting on the successes that you have are ultimately the two big deliverables in having generating internal support and justifying social media to somebody like me who may not always see the power of it. I'm going to pause us there, and we're going to go to some Q&A, and I believe that we've got some good questions that we'll follow up on. So let me see our first question. So we've got a question here that is that is from Alex. Alex, thanks for your question. And it says, with awareness as a metric, what stats do you use to measure that? That seems to be more qualitative. Is this true? Well, from our perspective, one way that you can make awareness metric more quantitative is by using Google Analytics. You can get an idea of what your awareness is by looking at direct traffic in Google Analytics. So this way you can measure your awareness over time as a trend. I think that part is really important, is being able to tell a narrative story of how impressions or reach is growing, and commensurately how that's affecting how people are coming to your site, and are you growing traffic. It's a reasonable facsimile for understanding awareness. Okay. Couple of other questions that we have. Let me see. What is a good benchmark engagement rate per post for B2B businesses? We get asked this all the time. A lot of our customers will say, just tell me what the right metric is. And the reality is it's nuanced. One of the reasons we're big advocates for having a comparative analysis is your industry, your competitive landscape, your audience is unique. And so you want to start with what is everybody else in the space doing, and what is the engagement rate amongst that entire company landscape, and then that really is the benchmark. And it's different. It's different for bigger brands. It's different for smaller brands. It's different for B2B, B2C, all of those components. And so I think you have to get a benchmark to be able to determine what is the right engagement rate per post based on the market that you're in. Okay. Another question that we have is, they know the answer isn't simple, but what is the most effective way to increase your organic reach on Facebook? I know the answer is actually easier than you might think. It's content. It's a lot like real estate, where they say it's location, location, location. Anytime somebody asks me to increase organic reach, I always talk about content. Make your content engaging, right? Recognize the content that is resonant with the audience. This is where reporting comes in. Are there specific terms? Are there specific themes that people are looking for? I'll give you a really good example. We found in our own analysis that when we focus a lot on topics like justifying social media, we get a lot more organic reach because we know that a number of marketers are trying to solve that. But when we do a post on, improve, Facebook, or top 7 trends, we may not get as much interaction. And so that helps us understand that so much of our audience is looking for content that help them justify or make a case. And so we put more emphasis on that. And so I think it comes down to make sure you use your content, make sure you measure how that content is performing, and then you iterate based off of that, right? One of the things that I'll sort of add on to that is the most important engagement metric when you're looking at content is shares and retweets, because what it says is that it's interesting enough that people think others will also enjoy it. So as you're thinking about understanding what content works, look at when they share or retweet. That becomes really important. We got another question. How do you determine the data of your competitors? Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of a plug. I would go into Rival IQ and frankly go crazy. If you've not tried it, we have a free trial. It's 7 days. It allows you to go and pull a benchmark of your competitors. Something I'd encourage you to do. Certainly, I think you should do it ongoing and continue to leverage Rival IQ, but even if you don't, go get that benchmark. Sign up for the 7-day trial. There's no credit card that you put in. Go get that and start to see what content are they putting out that is driving engagement. What social channels are they most active on? Of those social channels, where are they seeing engagement? Those are some things that you can get with a quick competitive or comparative analysis. And certainly I'd encourage you to do that within Rival IQ. New question that we've got is, to measure competitors' social performance, should I just check their followers each month? I know other stats are not publicly available, at least through the platform we use to track. I think if you're doing it if you're trying to measure their social performance by hand, that is incredibly time sensitive. I think that part is really important. I don't know that you're getting a significant material return out of that. So a couple of things that I'd suggest is a lot of the data is available, and I'd encourage you to understand that there are places where you can pull competitive data. You cannot get private data. So seeing things like how much money they're spending, or if they're boosting a post or things like that, you can't be certain and get that information. But what you can do in a platform like ours is be able to see how often do they post, what's the content of what they post, what keywords or hashtags can they post. So you can really begin to do that. When we talk about social performance, it's not just adding followers, because frankly, you can buy followers. That's why I think engagement rate per post is the most crucial. When we're looking at engagement rate per post, I think that part is really, really valuable, because it tells me you might have 1 million followers, but very few of them actually interact with the content, right? So that tells me their social performance is not strong. In this case, one of the things that we can do is when their social performance is showing high engagement rate per post, that is something you can look at and say, my competitors are doing incredibly well, okay? We have another question, which is, what is the best way to pull analytic or metric reports for social media? Again, it's a little bit of a softball question, which is I would use Rival IQ. In our world, we allow you to be able to pull information and automate all of the reporting, and we actually allow you to do things like custom reports so that you can look at the data in unique ways, so that you go beyond sort of this data dump and much more into insights and analysis. Now, again, I'm passionate about what Rival IQ does. A different way to answer that without plugging Rival IQ is to say, use a service. Doing it by hand is incredibly ineffective and puts you into a place where you are only getting data and you're not getting insights. And that subtle difference is really crucial. That if you're going and trying to pull data out of, like, let's say, Facebook natively, there are a bunch of limitations. You only get 28 days of data, right? You can't do competitors. And so using a service like Rival IQ or others would allow you to be able to, one, set up the custom report so that you can get insights that highlight areas where you can either put more money behind, put more effort, different channels to be on, right? But also just automates the process of getting the reports and federating that information internally. So another question that we have is, how do I get other people to think of social as part of the overall marketing plan? As an example, marketing webinars and other gated content. Well, I'll give you a little bit of a personal story. So my background is all in sales with a particular focus on growing top-line revenue. And I definitely have a mentality that anything that does not contribute to top-line revenue is not as important. It's a second or third tier thing to focus on. And historically, I've looked at social, particularly in the fact that I've always been with B2B brands, I've looked at social as a nice to have, but not a have to have, right? When I finally was at a company, I worked at a company called DocuSign for the past 4 years before I joined Rival IQ about 1.5 years ago. And one of the things that our social marketer there did was really sit me down and help me understand how social was crucial to getting awareness and to doing a couple of things: improving credibility, keeping top-line messaging front and center in front of the customer, and more importantly, we oftentimes were not a have-to-have when we first started at DocuSign, but we were a salve for a problem that a business might run into. Social was a way we stayed constantly in front of them so that we were the first call that they made when they had that problem. When he walked me through that, he really helped me understand that there are 4 legs to the marketing stool. There's demand generation, there's field marketing, there's communications, and there's social. And when we walked through those points and he understood the place that social played in that, he got my buy-in and constant executive support to investing more in it. And so I think for you, understanding how social can federate information and solve in those key areas is really important. And certainly I've become a believer. It's one of the reasons I joined here, is that I really recognize promoting webinars, promoting gated content, driving people to trials, creating not just signups for events, but actually creating activity during events are all really critical. And I think bringing data to how you do those things will help get people aligned internally. And I think that can start with a benchmark and saying, here's where we are, or here's where we were a year ago, and here's where we are today with the efforts that we've made in these areas. And I'm always happy for any of these questions. I'm happy to talk offline. I'm fairly passionate about particularly that justifying part that this question was asking. So we've got another question that I really like, which is, how do you sell social to small businesses just getting into the area who won't see ROI for quite a long time? So for me personally, one of the things that I think is so powerful about social is it's the most cost-effective way to do things like testing, right? To do things like raising awareness without big investments. If you can imagine, the old way that we did things was you do a radio ad or a print ad or things of that nature. So for me, it starts with helping them understand that social media is necessary, right? It's not a nice to have. You have to have it as a small business if you're going to have awareness, right? The second is having an active and legitimate social media profile will help build credibility. So if you can imagine a scenario where you can show that client who's a small business who says, we're too early, we don't want to invest in it. Well, here are the 10 other companies in your space that are local that are actually active on social media. That sense that they are instantly more credible by having that presence is one of the quickest ways to get them to want to invest, right? I think I think there's a bunch of other ways in which you can do that. You can help highlight that this is where their customers spend their time, and you need to be where your customers are when they're ready to make a purchase decision. I think if you can outline that, and customers, if you're a marketing agencies working with a small business, they're a lot like an executive who doesn't understand the power of social. And so walking them through the theoretic reasons why social is really important, and then adding in data and examples of how other companies are using it are really impactful. A lot of our agency clients actually use us to create pitch decks so that they're going out and pulling that competitive and saying, look at what other people are doing, and here's why we recommend you do these things, has been incredibly, incredibly powerful. So a great question, and hopefully an answer that will help you with that. Another question is, we're doing social media for app coder camps. Do you recommend having different strategies per platform? Emphatically, yes. I cannot state this loud enough, right? One of the biggest mistakes that I see is the mentality of what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? We're going to do a post, and we're going to post the same thing on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and we're just going to federate that across all of our channels. The reality is your audience is going to those channels for very different reasons. For me personally, I'm active on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Twitter I use for news. So the media that I follow, or the companies that I follow, I tend to interact with them when they give me content that I can read, links to articles, things that are thought-provoking, things that are news-oriented. Right? On Facebook, I'm there more sort of scrolling through, so I'm interested more in offers in that place or more additional articles. Instagram for me is all emotional. So I'm a big Jeep fanatic. I have a Jeep Wrangler. One of the things I love about their social strategy is on Instagram, they don't ever talk about promotions, new vehicles coming out. They just sell you the lifestyle. And me, I mostly just commute. I live in Seattle. I mostly commute to home and to work in my Jeep. But I love the notion that that I have a vehicle that could be out in the snow or all these different things. And Instagram is a place I connect with that on an emotional level. That strategy doesn't work on Twitter for me, because that's not what I'm trying to do there. And so you have to have a different strategy for the audience, because a couple things to remember, right? Each channel has a different audience, right? And that audience is trying to accomplish something differently in that channel. But more importantly, post times, post days are all different based on those channels, and it's really important, okay? All right, what have you found to be the most compelling argument for adding paid advertising on social media? Well, there's a lot of good reasons, but the first thing you need to do is you have to convince leadership to let you test social ads, right? Well, one of the mistakes that we often see is people try to go for the big buy. Like, I want X amount of dollars to put to ads, and they're not sure what's really going to work. And so that becomes a high risk, high reward endeavor that you don't need to undertake. So one of the things that we suggest, and where we see marketers being really successful, is you start out by asking for budget to just test a few ads, right? Once you then can come back and have data that shows a little bit of money has an impact on gaining followers, increasing engagement, or driving leads, like from downloads, for instance, you can then go back and begin making an argument for a larger budget dedicated to spend on social media ads. So one of the strategies that we love to deploy is we're going to try 3 different types of messages, right? We're going to put a little money behind each of them. We're going to see which ones perform. And that then gives you data to say, hey, I want to go a little bit further on this, or I want to double down in this area. It's also a great thing to use organic and understand where your organic is doing, and then put a little bit of money behind an organic post that's already successful and see if that increases as well. The key thing, and hopefully you've heard this consistently, is that we keep running into situations where you want to be able to start from a place of benchmark, right? So our organic posts generate X amount of engagement, right? And so you want to communicate that. Then you want to ask for a little bit of budget, and then you want to use data to advocate for putting more money behind it based on the success that you might have. I think that 3-step process actually builds your personal credibility internally, right? But it also gives you that place where people understand where you were, where you want to be, and how much that's going to cost, and what the impact of that was. And it's ultimately that impact component that is so crucial to getting additional budget, all right? Okay. Another question, do you have any recommendations regarding companies that provide services that allow you to track competitors' social metrics? Yeah, one of them is great that I've heard of. It's called Rival IQ. That's certainly the one that I'm a big fan of. That allows you to track both your social presence, so your personal and your private data and your public data, and then also then compares that to the public data of your competitors. And we have features that are things like boosted post detection. We have a machine learning algorithm that we just launched that allows you to track competitors and see which posts they're likely putting money behind, so that when you go to advocate for budget, you can say, well, our competitors are growing their audience, or they're getting more engagement, but they're doing that because they're putting money behind it. I want to start to put money behind ours so that we can compete with them. There are a few other tools out there, so we're not the only one. I definitely encourage you to take a look at them, but I have long felt that our cost to benefit ratio is incredibly high, and will give you so much return on investment in terms of automating the process, really informing your strategy, and making sure that you've got that comparative competitive benchmark, which is really important. So I think we've got, the answer was clarified, not competitive, but comparative. So we think of ourselves as a comparative analytics tool, which is really important. We use the name Rival IQ because that's how we got our start. But really, it's not just competitive. One of the most successful strategies that we see with our customers is that they'll create landscapes that compare competitors, but then they'll also go after what we would define as admired brands. And these would be companies that they think do a good job of targeting their audience, right? So an example might be, I might be a health bar company, right? I make a protein bar, and so I'm going to compare myself to Perfect Bar and Cliff Bar and Kind Bar and Pure Protein and the people I compete with. But I think about my audience and I say to myself, well, they're typically going to be athletic. My sense is they're probably outdoor oriented, and my guess is they're probably between the ages of 21 and 40, right? And so if I understand that, I think to myself, who else do I think does a good job of potentially going to that audience? I might track companies like Arc'teryx and Fitbit, who I don't compete with, but who I'm trying to look at doing that comparison and understanding how do they engage the audience and what strategies are they using that I might be able to deploy. That's really where you use our analysis or analysis tool to really bring in other companies to help inform your strategy. The competitive benchmarking and the automated reporting helps you communicate externally, but getting more companies that you track is all about idea generation, right? I'm intellectually lazy. I don't want to recreate the wheel, so I want to understand what other people are doing. Every Friday, I typically meet with a senior sales leader in the Seattle area. And the reason I do that is because I want their ideas on what are they doing to make their organization successful. How are they coaching people? Our strategy shouldn't be different in social. We should be looking at what other companies are doing to be successful, bring that into our voice, but then replicate it because we have a higher probability of success when we do that. Right? I think that's all the questions we have. Danica, I'm gonna look at you, and I'm getting a head nod that says yes, we're done. I appreciate all the questions and the interaction. As you can tell, I tend to be loquacious and have a lot of ideas and lots of words. I'm known for long talking, but I hope it was something that was really informative. In many ways, I like to think that I'm your target audience. And so as you think about making that justification internally to people who may not understand, we've really tried to provide you a lot of tactics and tools that you can use to really make that conversation more beneficial and to get you the attention, the commitment, and the support that you deserve around social. A few closing comments. This, as I mentioned, this session was recorded, so we'll send out a link to you. I really encourage you to follow us on Facebook. We've been doing a series of tips of the day for marketers throughout the month of December. That series is really just 1-minute snippets of just ideas that you can leverage to be more effective. We've also got a great blog series that we encourage you. You can go to rivaliq.com/blogs, or blog, I should say, and that'll really get you access to our blog, which has great content and really is more educational and informative. And certainly from the perspective of try it out. It's free. There's nothing, no commitment. You get 7 days to really use the product. We've got a great team that can talk to you about strategies that are being successful, but at the very least, come try out the product, and more importantly, just get that competitive benchmark to help you set a strategy. That's a great tool and a great resource to have. As always, you can reach out to us with questions at any time, and certainly follow up with us, but we appreciate you making time for us in your day. We wish you all a happy holiday and a great end to the year. Thanks so much.